Hello there and welcome back once again to another edition of Reach the Peak, the show where we take the cars of Forza Horizon 3 on one of the toughest challenges they can face, a tight, twisty hill climb course high up in Blizzard Mountain. We have 5 cars here for you today, as usual, and we're going to be kicking things off with a pretty interesting hypercar. This is the 2015 Koenigsegg Regera, 1,500 horsepower, 1,474 foot-pound torque, 3,589 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today, it's the torquiest car here today, and it's the highest in PI, being S2 class 957, and when equipped with the snow tyres. The Koenigsegg Regera is pretty interesting for multiple reasons, one of which is the fact that it has 1,500 horsepower, making one of the most powerful cars to ever take on our hill climb course, but perhaps its most interesting feature is its gearbox. You see, this thing essentially has one gear, which is interesting. Now, usually a big tactic going up here on Reach the Peak is to constantly be changing gear, making sure you're always at peak power. With having only one gear, the power comes on sort of gradually, I guess that makes sense. But the one interesting thing with the Regera is it seems to make all of its torque really low down, and you can make maximum torque at very, very low RPMs. And what that means is this car is very, very, very difficult to drive, because basically as soon as you hit the throttle, you're getting 1,474 foot-pounds of torque straight to the rear wheels. This is rear-wheel drive, and that's not great. It is a very tricky car to drive. It's basically a case of you've got to really mediate your throttle. Now, there's a couple of chances where you can stick your foot down, and holy bejeebers, this thing is quick. It is an insanely fast car. You probably saw it sort of on the first tarmacy section that we've got at the start of this course. It is insanely quick. As soon as you put the throttle down, you know, you can look down and you'll go from 100 to 150 straight away. It's insanely fast, but again, not having that gearbox to moderate gears is a bit of a problem when it comes to this car. Ultimately, I have driven the Koenigsegg 1.1 up here before. That was a terrifying car to drive, but honestly, I think it was better suited, just because it had that gearbox, so you could sort of give yourself less power if need be, whereas this thing is basically always making power. Next up, we move from a hypercar to a hyperbarge. It's time for the 2017 Bentley Continental SS, aka the Supersport. 700 horsepower, 749 foot-pound torque, 5,029 pounds of weight. This is the heaviest car here today. When equipped with the snow tyres, it is S1 class 859 is the PI. This one is quite interesting. With 700 horsepower, an interesting way to think about this car is basically a luxury four-wheel drive Hellcat. Hellcat makes 707 horsepower, but it all goes to the rear wheels. This thing is four-wheel drive, which means it goes to all four wheels. And as we know from previous experiences, four-wheel drive is always better than rear-wheel drive in case of, you know, similar powered cars. It is always better. So the Continental does actually stand a pretty good chance of doing well up here. I do like the Continental. I'm not so much a fan of the new one. I wasn't a fan of it before its facelift, but this facelifted Continental, the first gen facelift, I think it's a really good looking car. And the Supersport looks really cool, especially with the two-tone paint job and the rear spoiler. As far as it goes to drive, this thing is really very, very good indeed. It's, yeah, pretty spot on. It's a little bit on the firm side, if I had to level a criticism, a little bit on the firm side and a little bit heavy. But it's firmer because it's supposed to be, I guess, the more track-orientated Continental. Taking a Continental to a track is stupid, but I guess this is the more track-orientated version. And obviously, you know, no matter what you do, at the end of the day, it's still a £5,000 barge, but it's a great handling car. You get a lot of traction, you've got a lot of power. It's not quite as quick as you might expect. You know, you might expect a 700 horsepower thing like this to shoot off the line, and it takes a little while to get going, but once it gets going, it really does shift. Yeah, a really very, very good car to drive indeed. And one that I really did quite like driving up here. One of the better ones I've driven in a recent memory. Next up, we go from the comfort of all-wheel drive back to the joys of rear-wheel drive as we take a look at the 2009 Chevrolet Corvette ZR1, 638 horsepower, 604 foot-pound torque, 3,350 pounds of weight. this is a S1 class car. 876 is the PI number when equipped with snow tyres. Higher PI than the Bentley, although of course you do have to remember the fact that this is rear-wheel drive and not four-wheel drive, which does mean it won't be quite as quick as the Bentley. This is a C6 generation Corvette, and I like the ZR1 quite a lot. It's one of my more favourite when it comes to the Corvettes. I really like the gimmicky, see-through, supercharged sort of cover that you can see on the bonnet, and also I like the C6 mostly because of Need for Speed Most Wanted and the fact Webster had one, and I love Webster's design. I loved it so much I found it in Forza Horizon 3 and put it on this car for this episode, as you can see, which is nice. But this car comes in a bunch of fantastic colours. Comes in orange, yellow, blue, looks great in all of those. As far as the Corvette goes to drive, rear-wheel drive, 3,350 pounds, 638 horsepower. That's a lot of power. You know, most of the cars towards the top end of our leaderboard are more, 500, 600 horsepower all-wheel drive cars. Granted, this isn't going to go to the top of the leaderboard. And that weight is a little low. Occasionally I like a little bit more weight just to sort of settle the cars down a little bit. But the Corvette actually is a really likeable car to drive up here. Very consistent, which I wasn't expecting. And that's one nice thing. A lot of rear-wheel drive cars you drive up here, you don't quite know what they're going to do. The Regera from earlier, for example, granted that's more powerful. That you put your foot down and you don't really know which way it's going to dart, whether it's just going to go straight on, anything like that. The Corvette, you get a very quick understanding of what it's going to do. It is going to slide a little bit, of course it is, but it's not actually that slidey. It's just a really nice, consistent car to drive. One of the nicer, easier to drive rear-wheel drive cars that we've had up here, which is weird to say that about a Corvette, but I am saying it about a Corvette. Yeah, a really likeable, nice car to drive. Something that, maybe, if you upgraded it right, maybe put some rally suspension on it, it might not actually be the worst rear-wheel drive car you could pick for Blizzard Mountain. It might be something that you can use as an interesting little, something different, I guess. Next up, 2016 BMW M4 GTS, 493 horsepower, 442 foot-pounds torque, 3,329 pounds of weight. This is the lightest car here today. It is an S1 class car, 871 in PI when equipped with the snow tyres. Of course, this thing is rear-wheel drive, unlike the Corvette was, slightly less PI. Does weigh ever so slightly less, but of course has much less power. I'm guessing the PI comes down to how this thing would grip on the road. I'm sure in a grip battle on the road, a BMW would beat a Corvette ZR1. Actually, the Corvette ZR1's a nice driving car, and the M4's a little bit weird on the road. It sort of feels strangely disconnected. So I was sort of interested to see how the M4 would cope up here. We have had the standard M4, although that was such a long time ago, I genuinely don't remember how that drives. I like the M4 GTS though, it's silly. It's sort of a weird, silly BMW. I like the orange accents. I kind of like the fact that you have to put, it's got water injection, I believe. Which is a gimmicky thing, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of cool. I don't know why, I just kind of like the M4 GTS. It's a car which I'm not a huge fan of in real life, but sort of driving it in Forza, for some reason I kind of get a little bit of joy out of it, despite the fact that I don't even think it handles very well. It's a weird car, I'm a weird person. Anyways, as far as this car goes to drive, it's pretty decent actually, it's solid enough. It's a little bit on the twitchy end. I think that's sort of more an issue with the GTS than it is the standard. Of course, the car's more powerful than the standard M4. But on the road you can feel it's more twitching, it sort of brings those traits to the snow trail as well. There's a lot of turbo noise as well. I don't remember that from the standard car, but you can sort of hear the turbos working a lot, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I'd go for the Corvette personally if you're going to take a rear-wheel drive car up here. The M4 isn't bad in a pinch, but that twitch is just a bit weird. I'd probably go with the standard car, to be honest with you, just to avoid some of that twitching. Granted, it's less powerful, but as we've sort of ascertained from rear-wheel drive cars, more power really does not mean better when it comes to this course. And finally today, we have a car which, quite honestly, was made for this sort of conditions. It's the 2015 Volvo S60 Polestar. 345 horsepower, 369 foot-pound torque, 3,684 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful, least torquey, and lowest PI car we have here today. A-Class 779 is the PI number when equipped with these snow tyres. Of course, all-wheel drive Volvo in a traditional Swedish summertime. this should be a pretty good doddle in the park. I like the S60 a lot. I think it's a really good looking car. I don't think Volvo's built a bad looking car for many decades at this point. I'm a huge Volvo fanboy, people probably know that about me, and yeah, the Polestar is a really cool car. I really like it, and I also like the wagon version of this car as well. Probably like the wagon slightly more, but nevertheless the S60 Polestar is a very cool car indeed. As far as it goes to drive up here, it is buttery smooth. It was a doddle. As I said, you know, a Volvo with all-wheel drive should take this in its stride pretty easily, and this one really takes it in its stride. It's a excellent car, this really is, to take up here. It's just so easy, you know, it's almost like driving it on tarmac for this car, because it's just so simple for it. Again, all-wheel drive, snow tyres. You can't really go wrong with a Volvo. It hasn't got that much power to really get it in any trouble up here. I can't really say anything about it other than the fact that maybe it's a little bit on the slow side, and it is understeery. Certainly through some of the lower speed corners you definitely feel some understeer, but that's easily rectified. There's ways you can prepare for corners and stuff, and once you get used to that one aspect of the car, which honestly takes you about 5 seconds to change your driving style for this car, it's a really solid car to drive, as I said. But I was just amazed with how smooth and simple this was to take up here. There was no drama, no badness, it was just nice, smooth, honest driving. Yeah, I definitely recommend the Volvo S60 Polestar. I can't recommend this car enough usually, and that's why the V60 is the official car of Reach the Peak, as you can see here. Anyways, ignoring that, onto the leaderboard. In 18th place, the Bentley Continental SS with a 203.323, breaks up the GTR trifecta. A really good time, beats out an EB110, RS200, does lose out slightly to a 2012 GTR and a Metro, but a really solid time from Bentley as we expected. The next lot of cars are basically all in the same rough area. In 79th place, the Volvo S60 Polestar with a 211.798, which is a very good time from that car. In 83rd place, the Koenigsegg Regera with a 212.033, which beats out an Evora, an LFA, loses out to a Range Rover Supercharged. The Regera is about 5 seconds off of the 1-1. As I said, the Regera is just a harder car to drive than the 1-1. Moving down the board once again, we find the other cars. In 89th place, the Chevrolet Corvette ZR1 with a 212.966, beats out an Evo 6 stock, does lose out to a Chimera ZL1, which is pretty interesting, and the BMW M4 GTS goes into 96th place with a 213.500, interestingly enough, fractionally off of a BMW M4, so the 213s is where most cars gather up. Yeah, between the M4 and the M4 GTS, there really isn't enough. I think the GTS is slightly twitchier, it probably has slightly more of an advantage on the straights, but I'd choose the stock M4. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching this edition of Reach the Peak. Next time will be the final episode of Reach the Peak, so join me for that. Until then, farewell.